And yesterday at the White House, President Trump was addressing the coronavirus pandemic here in the U.S. when suddenly the Secret Service entered the room and ushered him out. All right, so Ben Tracy was actually at the briefing when that happened. Ben, we have a lot of different things to talk to you about, but first, let's tackle this whole issue with the Secret Service ushering the president out. The president said there had been a shooting. What happened?
Yeah, this was quite something. So the president was up there. He had just started this briefing. He was a couple of minutes into it. I could see this. There's always a Secret Service agent in the room just out of the camera range that's standing by a door, and that person happened to be kind of right in front of my seat. So I could see him talking in that little microphone in his sleeve, and obviously he was hearing what was going on outside. We then saw all these Secret Service agents run by the windows of the briefing room, so we knew there was a commotion. And then this agent went up to the president. You can see him there. He stepped up onto the stage and he said to the president, you need to leave the room. And the president, obviously, it appears to say, why. And we believe that he said there's shots fired. So then the president left the room. What we now know is what was going on outside was that a 51-year-old man had approached that intersection there, that's 17th in Pennsylvania, that's about 1 block from the White House. He approached the Secret Service, ran aggressively towards them, they say, and said that he had a gun. The Secret Service police officer then fired on the man, hitting him in the torso. A source tells CBS News that the man ended up not being armed. And then just minutes later, this all happened within about 6 minutes. The president was back at the podium in the briefing room saying there had been a shooting outside the White House. He said he was not rattled. And just proceeded with his briefing. So it was a pretty extraordinary couple of minutes there in the White House briefing room yesterday.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Pretty odd. But as you mentioned, he continued with his briefing. And so I want to get into some of the things that he brought up yesterday. He talked about mail-in ballots. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say, and then we can talk afterwards.
I'll tell you who's meddling in our elections. The Democrats are meddling by wanting and insisting on sending mail-in ballots where there's corruption all over the place.
Okay, so is there any evidence at all that supports what the president had just said?
There is no evidence of widespread fraud when it comes to mail-in ballots. And in fact, there is this weird diversion in what the president repeatedly says about this and what his own campaign is doing, where they're sending out information to their supporters saying, in some primaries that have happened recently, most notably in California, saying, vote by mail, it's safe and secure. So there's not even agreement within the Trump universe on this particular issue. But this is something the president continues to talk about at basically every opportunity he has. And it seems to be a way for him to kind of plant the seeds of perhaps delegitimizing the election and saying that because of these mail-in ballots, there was either fraud or the election results are going to be delayed because they have to count all of these mail-in ballots. Now that the latter thing there very well may happen. There could be a record amount of mail-in voting this time because of coronavirus, and that may delay election results. And the president has been pretty clear saying he wants to know the result on election night because you have to have an election night. That may not happen, and we've had recent experience in recent presidential elections where we have not known the outcome on election night. So we'll have to see how that plays out. There are some concerns in the Republican Party that his constant criticism of mail-in ballots may actually prevent Republicans from using that as a way to vote. And in states like Florida, where there's a very large population of senior citizens, that is the way they usually vote. So we'll have to see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's a pretty good observation when you talk about seniors and, the way voting will occur now in many places where people have to maintain social distancing and all that sort of thing. You're not going to have seniors who are going to be able to sort of wait in line 4 hours, perhaps in the hot sun if it's in Florida, to vote. All right, so speaking of moving forward with the election, the president has said that one of the places he's considering accepting his party's nomination is Gettysburg. He had before mentioned the White House, and there was a lot of backlash from that. And now that he said Gettysburg, there's also backlash.
Yeah, and for the same reason. The White House and Gettysburg, the battlefield of Gettysburg, are federal property. They are run by the National Park Service. And there is a thing called the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees from doing anything political on federal property. And the thought is, if you're going to have a big acceptance speech here at the White House or in a place like Gettysburg, inevitably you're going to have some federal employees involved in setting that up. The president himself is not subject to the Hatch Act, so it's not an issue for the president to do it. If the president were to decide to give his speech from the Oval Office, perhaps that might not be as big of a deal. But that's where some of the criticism is coming from. But, you know, in fairness to the president, in terms of at least the White House, there is historical precedent where you had presidents like Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter announce from the White House, from the Oval Office, that they were going to run again for a second term. So this is not completely unheard of. I think it would depend on the scope and scale of the event. There's also some pushback about Gettysburg, just because that is the site of the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, and obviously a place that Abraham Lincoln made hallowed ground with his speech. So there is a little pushback on that front as well.
Russia announced that it is now making a coronavirus vaccine available for use. There is widespread skepticism about this. This is a vaccine that has not gone through phase 3 testing yet. In fact, it's a vaccine that's sort of in the similar stages to many of the vaccines being developed here in the U.S. that we would never distribute widely. Nonetheless, that's what's happening in Russia. I believe they've named the vaccine Sputnik. What are we hearing from the White House about this?
No official response from the White House yet. We will hear from the president later today at a briefing, and he will undoubtedly be asked about this. We are told the president's actually getting a briefing today about the 6 vaccine candidates being created here in the United States. But we were able to talk to Senior Advisor Kellyanne Conway on the driveway here a little bit ago, and we did ask her about this. And she made the point that you just made, that, you know, in the United States, this vaccine is not at a point yet where we would call it a vaccine that you would give to people, let alone Vladimir Putin apparently has given it to his own daughter. It would have to go under much more rigorous testing here in the United States because, you know, the concern is not simply that a vaccine wouldn't work. It's that a vaccine could make somebody seriously ill or kill them if it's not a valid vaccine. So we'll see what the president says this afternoon. Kellyanne Conway did use an interesting phrase at one point. She said something to the effect of, our scientists are waking up to news this morning that the Russians are beating us when it comes to a vaccine. But then she really backpedaled on that and said that's partly because they don't have the same standards in place that we have here in this country. The president said again yesterday from the briefing room podium that he thinks we will have a vaccine in the U.S. by the end of the year.
Yes, that is what he said, though a lot of experts say that's pretty optimistic. Okay, before we let you go, this headline sort of, when I saw this yesterday, I gave my head a shake. Reportedly, the president has asked some of his aides to look into the idea excuse me, of blocking American citizens, prohibiting American citizens from returning to the U.S. if they have been in coronavirus hotspots. When I read it, it sounded like a non-starter from the get-go, but what have you heard about this?
This would be pretty extraordinary if this were to happen. These reports say that this is a draft rule right now that the White House is considering, that it's soliciting feedback from various agencies about this. And so, yeah, basically, if you're an American citizen or a permanent resident of the United States, if you come back and officials have reason to believe that you may have the coronavirus, they apparently could deny you entry into the country. This certainly would be challenged in the courts because, keep in mind, one of the reasons that Americans are not subject to any of the travel bans that the president and the administration have implemented is because you really, legally, the thought is that you can't ban an American citizen from returning to their country. So this is not about people who are not citizens of the country or illegal immigrants, which the president has used the pandemic to create more barriers on that front. This is about somebody that would have a valid U.S. passport and was traveling overseas and came back. The president will be asked about this today as well, and it'll be interesting to hear how he explains why those people wouldn't just be forced to quarantine. Why would they actually be denied entry into the country?
Yeah, you know, and I also sort of read about, people who are here legally, residents, green card holders, people much like myself, and I wondered whether or not that was something they were considering too, as well, blocking people from re-entering. But all right, Ben Tracy, thank you so much.
Thank you.